You'll be spending the next hour or so with us learning about the Salish alphabet. I'm Steve Eggesdahl, your host, and here we have...
I'm Chauncey Beaverhead.
And Lucy Vanderberg.
Salish, the Salish alphabet has 43 letters, and each letter stands for a distinctive sound in the language. You're going to be learning all 43 of those letters, and the pronunciation will be modeled by our native speakers, and I'll try and explain to you how to articulate those sounds, tell you something about where they're made and how they're made. When you listen to this, or when you watch this tape, you'll be using it with a handout called the Salish alphabet, and it'll look like this, okay? If you don't have this when you watch the tape, you're not going to get as much out of the tape. The first thing you should know about the 43 sounds and the letters, the 43 letters that go with those sounds, is that they are made in different ways and they're made in different places. First, we're going to go through where they're made in the mouth, and I'm going to run through these labels quickly, and the full explanation will come later on. The first set of sounds are called bilabial sounds, and they're made with the lips. Bilabial means bringing the two lips together in some fashion. Those four sounds are P, glottalized P, M, and glottalized M. The next set of sounds are the alveolar sounds, and there's a ridge behind your teeth, and you can feel it if you take your tongue and feel that ridge behind your teeth. That's your alveolar ridge. The next set of sounds moving backward in the mouth is made at the alveolar ridge. And those sounds are T, glottalized T, S, C, glottalized C, N, glottalized N, L, glottalized L, Bardell or slashed L, it goes by different names, belted L, and finally the glottalized barred lambda. Following those sounds, you've got post-alveolar sounds, and that's the area right behind the ridge, the alveolar ridge. And those, there are three sounds. That's S wedge, pronounced sh, C wedge, pronounced ch, and hard C wedge, pronounced ch. The next set of sounds, there are two of them, are made the palate, the hard palate in the mouth. That's a Y and a hard Y, or glottalized Y. Following that, there's the velar sounds. They're made in the velum. That's the soft palate in the roof of the mouth. That's K, rounded K, glottalized rounded K, rounded X, W, and glottalized W. Finally, we move back to the uvular sounds. There's a little flap that hangs down in your throat. If you look in a mirror, you'll be able to see it. The sounds there are Q, glottalized Q, rounded Q, glottalized rounded Q, back X, and rounded back X. There are sounds further down in the throat called pharyngeal sounds, and those are the pharyngeal, hard pharyngeal or glottalized pharyngeal, rounded pharyngeal, and glottalized rounded pharyngeal. And finally, there are the laryngeal sounds made right in the voice box, a glottal stop, and an H. The articulation of all those sounds we'll be dealing with in addition to the vowels. And if you look on page 2 of your handout, you'll see where those sounds are, place and manner of articulation. Those are the places that those sounds are made. Now, the manner of articulation, there are several important differences. First, there's a primary difference between voice sounds. Those are sounds where you're using your vocal cords, vibration in the vocal cords, and sounds where there is no such vibration. Those are called voiceless sounds. If you look on your chart, you'll see that all of the sounds on the upper part of the chart, called obstruents, you don't use your vocal cords. There's no voicing. Whereas all the sounds on the second half, the resonance and the vowels, you use your vocal cords. So that's a very important and primary difference in Salish. Two sounds are not exactly voiced or voiceless. They're called unphonated sounds. That's the H and the glottal stop. And finally, there's a difference between laryngalized sounds, which I've also called glottalized or hard sounds, and plain sounds. The laryngalized sounds are a sound such as an M or an L or the other resonance, and there's a slight strangled quality or squeeze quality to it, and that's why it's often called a hard sound. Now I'm going to talk about the consonants, the Salish consonants. The first type of consonant we'll talk about are stops. Stops are sounds that are made as the air is coming up out of the lungs and moving through the voice box. There is a complete stoppage of the airflow somewhere along the vocal tract, and that's why they call them stops. When you pronounce a stop, such as a P or a T, just like a suyapi P or T, there is a complete closure of the vocal tract, and when the air is released, there's a certain explosion, and that's why these sounds are often called plosives. So if I use the term stop or plosive, don't be confused. They mean the same thing. The first type of stop is a plain stop, and these plain stops in Salish are very similar to their counterparts in Suyapi. These stops will be pretty familiar to most of you, at least all but the Q sounds. P, T, K, rounded K, Q, and rounded Q. And now we'll have our native speakers pronounce some of these sounds for you. The first sound, number 1.
P. Puchen.
P. Puchen.
P. Puchen.
P. Puchen.
The second sound, T.
T. Tetzen.
T. Tetzen.
T. Tetzen.
T. Tetzen.
The third sound, K.
K. Kapi.
K. Kapi.
K. Kapi.
K. Kapi.
The fourth sound, a rounded K.
The rounded K. Kupen.
The rounded K. Kupen.
The rounded K. Kupen.
The rounded K. Kupen.
5, the Q sound.
Q. Kiechen.
Kiechen.
Q. Kiechen.
Kiechen.
The sixth sound, rounded Q.
Rounded Q. Koitlen.
Rounded Q. Koilen.
Rounded Q. Koitlen.
Rounded Q. Koilen.
Okay, I should say a few things about those stops. Most of those will be familiar to you. The P, T, and the K will be similar, very similar to the Suyapi sounds. K is a very unfamiliar sound in Salish. Historically, K became a ch sound. The Ks that exist now in Salish, most of them come from French, like kapi, or English, kasolin. A few of them may also occur as onomatopoetic sounds or sound imitations. But largely, a K and a glottalized K are very rare in the language. Q and rounded Q are sounds you will not have in English. Those are uvular stops that are made further down in the throat than a K or a rounded K. To make these sounds, what you have to do is take the root of the tongue and move it up toward that little thing that's hanging down, that little flap that's hanging down in the back of your throat. And that will take some practice, and the best way to do it is to get with a native speaker and try and imitate a native speaker in making these sounds. The little W that you see above the K and the Q means your lips are rounded, and lip rounding is a secondary articulation. So what you do to make a rounded K is you make a K sound and you round the lips, similar to the sound in English coop. So if you say coop, as in chicken coop, you'd be writing that in Salish as a rounded K, UP. Okay, let's move on now to the ejective stops. Ejective stops are different from plain stops. They've got a much more explosive quality. And these will be wholly unfamiliar sounds to most of you that are coming from English or other European languages. Ejectives are made by using what's called the glottalic airstream mechanism. And what you'll be doing is building up pressure in the voice box between the voice box and the point of release. So if it's a T, there will be pressure buildup behind the T, and you're going to release it very quickly. We'll talk about making an ejective stop in a minute, but first we're going to model these sounds for you. Number 7, the ejective P.
So ejective P, pulquin.
Ejective P, pulquin.
So ejective P, pulquin.
Ejective P, pulquin.
Number 8, ejective T.
Ejective T, tupen.
Ejective T, tupen.
Ejective T, tupen.
Ejective T, tupen.
Number 9, ejective rounded K.
So ejective rounded K, quentin.
Ejective rounded K, quentin.
So ejective rounded K, quentin.
Ejective rounded K, quentin.
Number 10, ejective Q.
Ejective Q, krachanten.
Ejective Q, krachanten.
Ejective Q, krachanten.
Ejective Q, krachanten.
And number 11, ejective rounded Q.
So ejective rounded Q, Kopman.
Ejective rounded Q, Kopman.
So ejective rounded Q, Kopman.
Ejective rounded Q, Kopman.
Okay, one thing you'll notice about those is there is that explosive quality to the ejectives, and you'll also notice that earlier I called them glottalized, now I'm calling them ejectives. I didn't change the name, they're known by both. They have an ejective quality, an ejective glottal quality, so people will call them glottalized P or ejective P. To make these sounds, let's start with a glottalized T or ejective T. That's one that's usually the easiest to start with. What you're going to do is put your tongue in position to make a regular T, okay, right at the alveolar ridge. Then build up pressure behind that closure, okay? Build it up. Try and take air and build up pressure behind it. And then you're going to release it. Now notice, that doesn't sound like a heavily aspirated T, which would be something like t, t, t. That's just increasing the amount of airflow that's coming out. Here you're actually building up pressure. Again, if you can get with a native speaker and practice this, that's the best way to learn how to make this sound. Once you've been able to learn how to do the ejective T, then you can try and do it for the other sounds. Now we're going to move on to fricatives. Fricatives are unlike stops. As I said, with stops, there's a complete stoppage of the airflow. With fricatives, there is a very narrow closure that air is forced through. If you take a knife and put it into a ball or an inner tube, you get a hissing that comes out. That's a fricative type noise. That's what you're doing when you make a fricative. You're making a very narrow closure that you're forcing the air through. And all of these sounds have a similar quality, a hissing or a friction-like quality to them. Most of these sounds will be different for you, and we'll start by again modeling these sounds with our native speakers. Number 12.
S. Soupman.
S. Soupman.
S. Soupman.
S. Soupman.
Number 13, Bardell, sometimes called Slashdell, sometimes called Squiggly L. Goes by a number of different names. It's an L with a little mark through it.
Bardell. Klotzen.
Bardell. Klotzen.
Bardell. Klotzen.
Bardell. Klotzen.
Number 14, S wedge.
The S wedge. Schadelman.
The S wedge. Schadelman.
The S wedge. Schadelman.
The S wedge. Schadelman.
Number 15, rounded X.
Rounded X. Weapon.
Rounded X. Weapon.
Rounded X. Weapon.
Rounded X. Weapon.
Number 16, back X.
Back X. Gelieten.
Back X. Gelieten.
Back X. Gelieten.
Back X. Gelieten.
And 17, rounded back X.
Rounded back X. Huelen.
Rounded back X. Huelen.
Rounded back X. Huelen.
Rounded back X. Huelen.
Okay, 12S shouldn't be that hard for anybody to make. It sounds very much like the Suyapi S. Bardell, on the other hand, is a new sound for most of you, and I'll tell you kind of a trick on how to make it. Everybody take your hand and put it on your voice box and make a Z. Make a Z sound. Zzz. Now make an S sound. S. A Z and an S are exactly the same sound. One is made with vibration in the voice box and the other isn't. So you can switch now from a Z to an S like this. Zzz, zzz. All I've done is turn the vibration in my vocal cords off. We're going to do the same thing with an L and a Bardell. Everybody make an L. Oh. When you turn it off, you say oh, oh. Helps to have a little bit of spit. But the Bardell is just a voiceless L, and so for those of you that are having trouble making it, just do that. Do the Z, S first, and then do the L and the Bardell. And with enough practice, you should be able to do that. The S wedge is the same sound as an English sheep, and if we were to write that in Salish, we would write an S wedge, I accented, and a P. That's the way we'd write it in Salish. The rounded X, number 15, is a fricative. It's made at the velum, the same place that you make a K. So make a K, and make your closure for a K, and then just pull the tongue down a little bit so some air can get through. Okay? Now round the lips, and you'll be making a rounded X sound. And that's the sound that we had in weapon. I spread it out. The back X, the X with the little dot under it, number 16, is going to be a little bit more difficult for you to make because it's made at the uvular region of the mouth. Once you've learned how to make a Q, and that's something you should have learned to make before you try and make this sound, you just lower the tongue a little bit again, the same way that you made the rounded X by lowering the tongue and allowing some air to come through by rounding the lips. What you're going to do with the back X is you're going to make a Q, form your Q, and then let a little bit of air through. That's going to sound quite a bit more raspy than the rounded X. To make the back rounded X, number 17, you do the same thing you just did to make the back X, but you round the lips. So you go, and you round the lips. Okay? Next we'll move on to affricates. Affricates are sounds that are a combination of a stop and a fricative. We've just got done looking at stops and fricatives. If you take a stop beginning and put a fricative ending on it, you're going to have what are called affricates. It's a stop closure with an affricated release. These sounds will draw together what you've learned so far about making ejectives, and will also introduce yet another sound. Again, we'll have our native speakers model these sounds for you first. Number 18, C.
18, C. Tune.
C. Tune.
18, C. Tune.
C. Tune.
Number 19, glottalized C.
Glottalized C. Zahlen.
Glottalized C. Zahlen.
Glottalized C. Zahlen.
Glottalized C. Zahlen.
Number 20, C wedge.
Wedged C. Cheatzen.
Wedged C. Cheatzen.
Wedged C. Cheatzen.
Wedged C. Cheatzen.
Number 21, hard, or I'm sorry, glottalized C wedge, 21.
Glottalized C wedge. Chehuen.
Glottalized C wedge. Chehuen.
Glottalized C wedge. Chehuen.
Glottalized C wedge. Chehuen.
22A, glottalized barred lambda.
Glottalized bar lambda. Glatchkenum.
Glottalized barred lambda. Glatchkenum.
Glottalized bar lambda. Glatchkenum.
Glottalized barred lambda. Glatchkenum.
And 22B, regular barred lambda. And this only occurs in certain combinations before other ejectives. Number 22B.
Regular barred lambda and mekl.
Regular barred lambda. Mekl.
Regular barred lambda and mekl.
Regular barred lambda. Mekl.
Okay, I'd like to say a few things on the sounds. Making a ch sound, the C wedge, is the same sound as an English cheese. So that's not going to be difficult. In order to turn it into an ejective, you already have practiced with T how to make a T, a regular T, and an ejective T. Just do the same thing for ch and ch. The C sound is like the sound in English cats, the TS sound in English cats. Only in Salish, that C can occur at the beginning of a syllable, at the end of a syllable, and just try and say a ts sound, as in cats. To make an ejective, the same thing you did with the T and the ejective T. Ts, ts. The glottalized barred lambda comes from the Greek letter lambda, which is the L sound in Greek. The bar makes it what we call the affricate sound of a T combined with a Bardell. You've learned how to make the Bardell. We did that just a few minutes ago. And you do a T closure with a Bardell release, and you also add the ejective quality for 22A. And that's how you say the T sound. Okay? This one right here, most people have trouble with. And of all the sounds you'll be learning in Salish, this is the one you probably will have to practice the most. We just finished talking about the obstruent consonants. And on your chart, again, the upper rows, right here, the upper 3 rows, are all obstruents. You'll be able to see this on your chart when you look at it, if you can't see it here. Now we're going to talk about the rows down here, the bottom 2 rows. Those are resonants. Okay, what's the difference between obstruents and resonants? It has to do with the degree of closure in the mouth when the air is coming out of the lungs and you're articulating a sound. With an obstruent, there's either a complete closure or nearly complete closure of the airflow. With a resonant, there's much less constriction in the vocal tract. Okay? Resonance. The plain resonants largely will be familiar to you because they're articulated very similarly to Siapi. Again, we'll have the native speakers model them, and most of these will be familiar except when we get to some of the pharyngeal sounds. So now we'll move ahead and have our native speakers model the sounds. 23, M.
M, meeten.
M, meeten.
M, meeten.
M, meeten.
24, N.
N, nietjen.
N, nietjen.
N, nietjen.
N, nietjen.
25, L.
L, lachen.
L, lachen.
L, lachen.
L, lachen.
26, Y.
Y, jelgen.
L, jelgen.
Y, jelgen.
L, jelgen.
27, W.
W, wichten.
W, wichten.
W, wichten.
W, wichten.
28, plain pharyngeal.
Plain pharyngeal, ratet.
Plain pharyngeal, hatat.
Plain pharyngeal, ratet.
Plain pharyngeal, hatat.
29, rounded pharyngeal.
Rounded pharyngeal, außen.
Rounded pharyngeal, außen.
Rounded pharyngeal, außen.
Rounded pharyngeal, außen.
The pharyngeals are sounds that are made of constricting the area between the voice box and the back of the tongue. That's the area that's called the pharynx, and there's a constriction, and that gives you a sound that sounds very vowel-like. And originally these sounds were written as vowels, but they are consonants. They're about as close as you can get to a vowel and still be a consonant. They're written with what looks like a backwards glottal stop, and sometimes for new learners they look like a drunken glottal stop. Those will take some practice, but again, if you can get with a native speaker, you'll be able to learn these sounds. They're interesting in that fewer than 5%, 4% of the world's languages have a pharyngeal in them, and Salish has 4, so it makes Salish unique. One thing that I should tell you about the resonance, these resonants that we've just looked at, the M, N, L especially, in final position they differ somewhat from Suyapi, M, N, and L. So when you say the English word, the name Tom, there's a closure after the M, whereas with the Salish Tom, meaning lack of, there's often a release after the M. And when you get with a native speaker, you'll be able to hear that difference. Now we're going to move on to the laryngealized resonance. Laryngealized resonance have a tightened or constricted quality attached to the sounds that we've just made. And right now we'll have our native speakers model these for you. 30, laryngealized M. I've also called this glottalized M. Again, don't be confused. Some people call these sounds glottalized, some people call them laryngealized. They mean the same thing. Number 30, laryngealized M.
Laryngealized M, mems zu.
Glottalized M, mems zu.
Laryngealized M, mems zu.
Glottalized M, mems zu.
31, Glottalized N.
Glottalized N. Snet note.
Glottalized N, snet note.
Glottalized N. Snet note.
Glottalized N, snet note.
Glottalized L.
Glottalized L. Lachtemen.
Glottalized L, lachtemen.
Glottalized L. Lachtemen.
Glottalized L, lachtemen.
33. Glottalized Y.
Glottalized Y. Yet uquet.
Glottalized Y, yet uque.
Glottalized Y. Yet uquet.
Glottalized Y, yet uque.
34. Glottalized W.
Glottalized W. Where witskutlet.
Glottalized W, wet witskutle.
Glottalized W. Where witskutlet.
Glottalized W, wet witskutle.
35. Glottalized pharyngeal.
Glottalized pharyngeal. Anten.
Glottalized pharyngeal. Aten.
Glottalized pharyngeal. Anten.
Glottalized pharyngeal. Aten.
36. Glottalized rounded pharyngeal.
Glottalized rounded pharyngeal. Somewhat.
Glottalized pharyngeal. Somewhat.
Glottalized rounded pharyngeal. Somewhat.
Glottalized pharyngeal. Somewhat.
Okay, you'll notice with those sounds that when they're in initial position, they're often not as easy to hear as when they're in later position. So when you heard 32, lachtemen, that glottalized L quality isn't as clear as if that L were to occur after a vowel. Finally, we're going to move in the consonants to laryngeals, and there are two of them in Salish. One is a H, which is similar to the Suyapi H, and the other is a glottal stop. The glottal stop is that catch in the voice box that when you say English, or for some people when you say button. It has a much more important role in Salish. It is a true distinctive sound in Salish instead of a sound as in English where it's used as a variant of an English sound. Again, we'll have our native speakers model those two sounds now. 37, H.
H. Helt.
H. Helt.
H. Helt.
H. Helt.
38, glottal stop.
Glottal stop. Uuset.
Glottal stop. Uuset.
Glottal stop. Uuset.
Glottal stop. Uuset.
There are two things that need to be said about the laryngeals. When a laryngeal follows a vowel in a syllable that's not a stress syllable, that an H is not very clear, and a glottal stop is often not very clear. And what happens is the unstressed vowel that's followed by a laryngeal takes on the qualities of that laryngeal. So a vowel H will sound like a breathy or whispered H, and a vowel followed by a glottal stop will sound like a laryngalized or creaky voice vowel. It's important to write the glottal stop or the H in these words to capture that special sound of those vowels, and also to represent the consonant in those words. So try and listen carefully for those, for the H and the glottal stop when they're in unstressed syllables. Now we're going to move on to vowels. We've finished the consonants and we're going to move on to the vowels. There are 5 distinctive vowels in Salish, or what linguists would call phonemic vowels. E, U, A, and A. And they're written as I, E, U, O, and A. We'll model those vowels now with items 39 through 43, and notice that as vowels occur in different environments, they're going to have different sounds. In a sense, they're like chameleons. They change their color a little bit depending on the surface or where they're placed in the word. So what is written as an I, pronounced E in some words, may sound like an A in other words, and still more like I in other words. Okay, so we'll model those for you, and you'll see that the vowels do change their shape a little bit in different environments. 39A. I.
Til.
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 39B. I.
Kilt.
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 39C. I.
Ai.
I.
Ai.
39D. I.
Ioi.
Ioi.
40A. U.
Hui.
Hui. Hui.
40B. U.
Hopt.
Hoped. Hoped.
49C. U.
Wisentko.
Wisentko. Wisentko.
49A. E.
Deje. Deje.
41B. E.
Denne.
Denne.
42A. O.
Hoi.
Hoi.
42B. O.
Papa.
Papa. Papa.
43A.
Nas.
Nas. Nas.
Notice how the vowels, all but the 43A, change their shape slightly depending on which environment they're in. In earlier writing, the U sound, the variant that was O, was often written as O. That caused problems in some words, and you can see the explanation on your handout. Now, the way things are written, anytime you see a U after a uvular sound, it's going to be pronounced an O. And if you make your uvulars correctly, it's difficult to really say an U vowel after it. Similarly, an I following a uvular is going to be lowered a little bit in the range of A to E. And that's just a natural lowering of the vowel following a uvular. So when you see a QI, that's going to be pronounced K as a natural lowering of the vowel. That's as far as we need to go for modeling our sounds, and we just want to say a few little things about comparing the Suyapi system to the Salish system. If you look on your sheet, you'll be able to see the configuration for Salish vowels, which are 5 phonemic vowels with different shapes. compared to quite a bit more for English. And look at the difference in configuration of where they're made and how they're made. And you'll see why you may be having some trouble learning to pronounce Salish vowels. Even more so, if you look on the last sheet of your handout, comparing Suyapi consonant phonemes with Salish consonant phonemes, you're going to see a very different configuration of where those consonants are made and how they're made. So you're moving from the Suyapi system for vowels and consonants that differs quite a bit from the Salish system. So don't be discouraged. Get with a native speaker, try and hear the language as much as you can, and sooner or later you'll be able to pronounce these sounds with native or near native effect. Thank you, and get with a native speaker as soon as you can.
Khaskhalkha Persia isn't Skelly Isilkhlacht is Sihult. Good afternoon, good day to everyone out there, my fellow tribal people, my friends, my children. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the alphabet the Salish Pondere Culture Committee uses. And this was developed in the 1970s, and not too long ago, Steve Agostall made a tape with some of the speakers from the Culture Committee showing the places where these sounds start. So that was a real good tape. And I just want to say that there are a few places where we haven't changed very much that we would like to let you know about these things. And if you have any questions or concerns about them, especially you language teachers, the Salish Pondere language teachers, please let me know at the Culture Committee and we can talk about it and see if we can make any changes, if any changes need to be made. First of all, I'd like to talk about the place where Steve talks about the fringes. That's like the backwards glottal stop or a backwards question mark without the dot. I have not used this in my writings. I couldn't come to grips with it. I couldn't make any sense out of it. So I haven't used those, and I would like to continue using the double vowels where those are used instead of the pharyngeals. So if you have any concerns about that, please let me know. We'd like to get all of the alphabet standardized so that everybody's using the same alphabet, writing the Salish Pondere language. Another one concern I have, or something I don't want to see changed, is the use of the I instead of the EY. When they first began to write the language, they used EY in words such as Kwai, Queen, Tsalke, Aimin. Those are just some samples. And then they changed the EY to an I. So it's written a little different, and to me it sounds different when it's written like that. So I would like to keep it the original way. The way they had it written, it would sound like Kwai, Queen, Tsalke, Aimin. So I could show you this, and maybe, you know, they could make a close-up of it. This is the way we had it originally. Oi, kwai, quain, tsirke, mean. And this is what it changed to, according to that new way that the linguist did on this side. So I would like to keep it this way. And so if any of the teachers have any concerns about that, please let me know. Maybe we can talk about it and get it all standardized, done one way. I explained at the language camp this past summer that if you say, if you're talking about a buffalo and you spell it like this and it's sounded out like that, it would mean many different black things. Whereas it is like this, it's just buffalo, that word. Kwai, kwai. If you say it like this, it'd be many black things that would be changed. Kwai, kwai, many black things. Or several black things. More than one black thing. So we'd really like to get that straightened out. So that's a concern I have about that in writing the language. When we talk about some of the sounds, the consonants that are glottalized, I think we really need to listen to how the fluent speakers say them, because sometimes when they're written, there's either glottalization put on a consonant where there shouldn't be, or else that glottalization is left off where it should be. So if we could work on that a little bit and make sure that everyone hears those sounds correctly, because I pointed out to some people that if you leave off the glottalization on some consonants, then you might change the word. There might be another word that's spelled the same exact way. You could change the meaning of that word. On that tape, for instance, or on that video, for instance, on the word klotzen, the C should not have a glottalization on it, but it did on there, so that it'd make it a little different. It'd be klotzen. And it's just little different places like that we just need to pay attention to. On some words, the O is changed to a U. I think it should be stayed the O, kept the O, because that's just not how the word is said when we're actually speaking Salish. Like in the word on the video, Oatman. It's spelled with the U and it should be with an O. Then it would really sound like how it's said. If you said it with a U, you would say Oatman, Oatman. If it's said with an O, it would be the correct word, Oatman. So just little things like that would really help to keep it going the right way. There are many other places too that we could really work on to standardize that Salish Pondere International Phonetic Alphabet. So again, I ask that you Salish Pondere language teachers have any concerns about this, please give me a call or stop by at the Culture Committee. Our phone number is 745-4572. So please stop by or call. And they're talked about having 40-some characters. And I counted them, and if we do not use the pharyngeals, then there would be 38 or 39, which would be less. Oh, and the reason why I'm saying all of this is, especially about the pharyngeals, is because I don't think we should change so that people who are trying to learn language won't get confused and they won't get discouraged. We want to keep the language, the spelling of the alphabet as simple as possible for people so they will continue to learn. We don't want them to get discouraged and quit because they can't understand those characters. So that's why we want to do this. That is really important. Those are my thoughts on writing the Salish Pondere International Phonetic Alphabet. And again, if the teachers would like any input or if they have any concerns about this, they could call me at the Culture Committee at 745-4572, and you can either call or drop by there and we can talk about it. And so we will talk to you again next time.